Welcome to Authors Revealed. I'm Becky Anderson. I'm so thrilled to have one of my favorite historical novelists here. From England, it's Conn Iggulden with his new book, War of the Roses, Stormbird. Well, Conn, welcome to Naperville and to Anderson's. I have been so excited. I couldn't wait till you got here because I want to tell you I absolutely adored this book. Could not put it down.
Good.
So I just want to know, the book is just out. It's only been out for a few days here in the United States, but in the UK, how long has the book been out for you? It's already probably been a little while, right?
Yes. I mean, it's been through hardback. It came out last October. And it's been out in paperback, and it's done reasonably well,
Yeah.
It was always a little scary for me because it was the first one I'd ever written that was English history.
Right.
And Julius Caesar and Genghis Khan are fairly alien, but I was always looking for the greatest story to tell. I wasn't looking for a particular culture or a particular century, and I was looking for the story first, and I found the story was here. In the struggle between the houses of Lancaster and York in the 15th century.
Yeah,
that's all I ever asked, really, that the story be there.
Right.
And of course, I mean, you've got a French princess coming across at the age of 15, and expecting a life of peace and plenty, and servants waiting on her, and she discovers that her husband is too weak to hold the throne, so that it must fall to her, and that is an amazing. I love historical fiction because it actually happened. It has a certain power. We were just mentioning George R.R. Martin, and he writes wonderful fiction. But when you see a scene like a 15-year-old Margaret of Anjou coming across on an English ship to marry the king, and going to an abbey and meeting her husband for the very first time at the moment that she got married to him, then it's all the more extraordinary because it was a real event, and that's why I like historical fiction. It has that power.
And this book has so much power because I've always talked about really good historical fiction. Instead of reading just bland, straight history, historical fiction fills in all those gaps, those emotional gaps, that it makes the history more alive. It makes it, I think it makes it more memorable. I think you understand those times. You understand the people, not even the main players at that time, but even the average players at that time.
It is. I mean, it's as always. If you had to write the history of the last 20 years, you'd do great overarching plans and wars and all sorts of things, but also the individual lives, and it would almost be too complex. I mean, part of historical fiction is simplifying to some extent and finding a path through that actually makes some sort of a sense. Because the overarching story of England losing France, because England used to own about 2/3 of it, including Paris. So the French king had the sort of rump end of it at the bottom. I think I can say that without being offensive. And losing all that in exchange for a wife and a truce because the king was too weak to hold that land, and really stopping England being invaded for that time. Those are down to the personalities involved. And of course, I did come to the conclusion that somebody had to exist who could find a French princess who wasn't related to the French king, which is no easy task, who was very close to the English King Henry, and would understand his need for a wife and a truce and everything else, and developed the spy master character from that.
I thought he was fantastic.
I was really
my gosh, he was so great.
He was, of course, the concept existed. Elizabeth I had Walsingham. And also a man called John Dee, who was a huge fan of numerology, and he used as his special signal to the Queen that this was for her eyes only. It was 007, which was known to Ian Fleming when he was looking for the James Bond. So there is a history of spying, but this is before that. And I always always joke that this was a man too good to get into the history books. That's the thing. He existed, but his name wouldn't.
But his character is so plausible. I mean, this is sort of the spy master of the king who basically makes everything happen. And his character, what he does to escape from the Duke of York, and all that stuff, going through the countryside and jumping in ditches and just dress as a peasant.
I didn't want to make him a sort of cerebral Sherlock Holmes type,
because
he was a young man, and also I have to say that a writer. Everything they experience, every person they meet, it can very easily then end up in a book. And I will say, my son's football coach, soccer coach, used to regularly threaten to knock me out. If I said something he didn't like, He said, I'm this close to knocking you out, Con. I'm this close. You know, it was his regular threat. It was funny, but at the same time, he was a man who had taken up cage fighting to see how he enjoyed it in his 30s. So not completely without, you know, that foundation. And things like that go into the characters. It's all grist to the mill. Interesting characters you meet. You know, people who have a particular way of speaking, and all of this goes in.
But I thought he was brilliant. He added so much life to the story.
Yes.
Yeah, so a great invention, putting him in there.
I was very pleased with him,
Yeah.
And his frustration is tricky, because I've shown him to be intelligent, but occasionally things go badly wrong, and I have to have him predict the wrong way, and it's a pleasure. It's a joy to write, actually. Yeah.
So after writing about Caesar and that series, and then Genghis Khan, what was it like, now focusing in on, your home in a way, and the history of your country,
There is that fear that there are no excuses, that if I give somebody the wrong trousers or the wrong kind of castle or something like that, then I look like an idiot. I have to avoid that.
Yeah, right.
But at the same time, I mean, and in the past, I've obviously been to Rome, and I've been to Mongolia, and I've ridden horses and developed saddle sores and all sorts of horrors.
Yeah, the Genghis, I read about that. That had to have been...
That was really grim. I know. I won't go into detail about it. It was horrible. As an experience.
But at least you could write from experience.
Well, it was kind of. I can only assume that Mongolian riders are like leather down there,
right?
And that's what I'm going to say on that subject. But that kind of thing. I went sailing in the Pacific because I needed to write some sailing scenes in Rome, and I wanted the experience, and dolphins under the prow and all the rest of it. If I possibly can, I do the real experience if I possibly can.
And that's what I thought. This book too. I mean, it's the sights, it's the smells. I mean, everything. The description you put, you really feel like you're there. I mean,
I've been to all of the key places. Of course, some of them are in ruins, and a couple of them I deliberately went to in winter, because the key scenes were in winter, and I wanted to experience how bitterly cold it was to be there.
Yeah.
I mean, this is it. I try to make it as vivid and visceral and believable as humanly possible, because you're always trying to bridge that gap. The rest of it is research. You've got to learn, the way people spoke, and do your very best without overdoing it. I can't have everyone thee and thowing and forsoothing.
Well, and that's what I was wondering, because you're thinking, okay, medieval England, they didn't speak like we do today.
Not even Shakespearean. I mean, this is in some way, but this is more like Chaucer. So it would be almost unrecognisable to a modern ear.
So you had to come to
take
some balance,
a couple of liberties, which makes it all the more important to do the research than the other bits.
Right.
And I remember I was trying to work out if it was possible to smother someone with a pillow, and I asked my wife if she would do that. So we got a selection of different pillows, and I lay down. We had obviously a sort of panic thing if my hand knocked, and she was quite enthusiastic about it, I have to say. She really enjoyed the whole idea. But one by one, she attempted to smother me with different kinds of pillows.
Right.
And I can conclude it doesn't work as long as you don't panic. And I suppose if you were at death's door, maybe in a hospital bed, then conceivably it could kill you. But as long as you don't panic and just breathe slowly, I could breathe through practically anything, even when she was really leaning, bearing right down, as I say, with unusual enthusiasm. But it's that kind of thing. I will never again attempt to write a scene where someone is, and yet it's still, I see it popping up in television programs all the time.
Oh, sure.
Someone only has to lean over with a pillow.
Oh, it's a few seconds, and they're gone. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. Yeah. So, Henry VI. The Lamb.
Yes, well, he's a tragic figure. And
he is.
I felt very sorry for him.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't an idiot. He would have understood all the comments and all the disappointment around him, because his father was this extraordinary warrior, Britain's most famous warrior, King Henry V, and beats the French at Agincourt, and saves France for the English, which is a bit of an odd concept now. But,
sure.
And then of course dies fairly ignominious. Dies at 35 from something like dysentery, and his son is brought up by regents and doesn't become the son that his father should have had. He's a decent. Pious.
Very pious, you really show that in the book.
He spends most of his life praying and no time at all ruling or becoming a great big bearded bully, like the sort of people that they actually wanted. And he was a very decent man, and it was his weakness that effectively led to the Wars of the Roses, because there were very strong characters around him, and the throne was effectively vacant. And and the great tragic element, which is, I'd say, would make a Shakespearean play, but of course Shakespeare did actually write plays called Henry VI, Part 1, 2, and 3. So I mustn't say as if it had never occurred to anyone. But the Shakespearean tragic aspect of the young girl coming across and then having to protect her husband and later her son from the sharks around him, any one of whom would take his throne away in a heartbeat. It was a great. But then another thing I liked about this, you're dealing with real people, and it isn't as simple as there are goodies and baddies. So the king is the good family, the people who want his throne, they're the bad ones. It's never as simple as that. I mean, Richard, Duke of York had Henry VI in his not care. He had him imprisoned effectively for months. And, I mean, I'd just come off writing Genghis Khan. If Genghis Khan had an enemy in his care, in his control for months, that enemy would quickly have just gone. Enemies did not lurk about, as far as Genghis was concerned. They were a luxury. But Richard, Duke of York, didn't kill the king. He couldn't kill this very decent, honourable, innocent young man. And I suspect it would have been a sense of awe for the power of the king, the anointed by God power of the king, but also the innocence of the boy. It would have been like killing a child. And Richard, Duke of York, was not a stage baddie, willing to murder people, left it and red-handed grab the throne. At all. He was a man very much like you and me, and I don't think he wanted to live with the guilt of that for the rest of his life. So they are wonderful characters.
No, it's incredible characters. But choosing Margaret and Henry, I mean, I think a lot of people don't know her part in all of this. And I thought it was so interesting that you make her sort of this she's our main protagonist in some ways, which is different for you. Here you have a woman.
I've written strong women.
I know you
before,
have before, but
my mother was one. I tell you, still is actually. I shouldn't say one.
Okay, don't say one.
It came from past tense. No. I mean, it's unusual for me, I suppose, to have a main lead like that be her. But I mean, in many ways, she's the most interesting character in it because of the changes in her. At 15, she was dominated by her father in René of Anjou, this peculiar character who claimed to be king of almost everywhere, Sicily, Naples, Jerusalem, couldn't enforce any of it, spent most of his life in prison. And she comes to England and discovers that she has to protect her son and her husband, and eventually ends up, I mean, she gives orders in battle, and she does actually, this isn't quite the Keira Knightley who can suddenly use a bow. This is a woman who gives active orders on the field of battle to earls and dukes at the Battle of Tewkesbury. And for example, when one battle was lost and she realised suddenly that she had to get out of the area, she asked the local smith to reverse the horseshoes on their horses so that as they rode away they would appear to be coming towards the battlefield. And this is this kind of thing. She was clever and ruthless when it came to it. I mean, she took her son into Scotland to marry him off to a Scottish princess to get the help of great hairy Scotsmen to come south. And that and that worked. She brought thousands of them down and was willing to take that kind of a risk to save her husband. At that point, he was in prison. I mean, she was a really interesting character, and she deserves to be better known.
And she's not, though, which is so interesting.
She's one of those that's fallen by the wayside a little bit.
But I love, she's 15 years old, but I love the whole description of course, there is the pretense, I guess it's not a pretense, but she's married off, but she doesn't actually meet her husband until months and months later.
Sort of thing that only kings can do.
To have somebody stand in for him.
And he was a wonderful, and William de la Pole is a wonderful character. Funny enough, I was contacted recently by one of his descendants. It's a very odd thing when you're writing historical fiction, especially based in England, where you know that every major character has descendants who are still around, and if you write a casual scene and you think to yourself, well, I need something to fill this chapter, shall I have him kick a dog? The great-great-great-granddaughter or something is going to write to you and say, I don't think he would have done that. I'm pretty sure.
So the actual descendants of the Duke of Suffolk.
Yes, all of this had to be accurate, of course. I mean, that was the point. He threw himself on the king's mercy and then was banished for 5, well, I won't give away the whole story.
No spoilers.
It was, but I mean, I did, for example, find a few lines of his poem that he wrote to Margaret of Anjou in a courtly style. Nothing inappropriate, let me assure you. He was a happily married man. But, he was writing it was just lovely to find a personal few lines of poetry written by that man to another of the major characters. It was, it's touching. His story, I felt he's been badly treated by history as well, because the accusations made against him were terrible. That he was a traitor, that he'd bargained to give away parts of France, that he'd arranged with other men, to conspired, and all these endless calumnies against him. But actually, I don't think any of them were true. It's the kind of thing that happens when you need a scapegoat. Even today, it still happens occasionally. You know, when the wrong person crosses the people in power, then they suddenly are accused of all sorts. But I think he was at heart a decent man. I don't think he deserved what happened to him. This is often the case.
But the relationship with Derry, the two of them were very interesting. It was very interesting that you put in there. I like that too.
It was good. Well,
But you know, thinking about English royalty, and I loved the linealogy, the lineage, the charts at the beginning of the book, and the maps were great to have that, because the English royal tree is always very interesting. It's very complicated, and the way it intertwines and everything. It's like, and not that there's tons of incest going, but lots of cousins marrying each other and that sort of thing.
Well, there is a fair bit of that, yes.
That's right. But it was great to have that. But it's also, I just wonder how many readers, you know, who don't realize that the English king had so much power compared to, you know, it's almost a century since they had any power, you know.
The beginnings of the parliamentary system, because this was 200 years after Magna Carta.
Right,
We've got the 800th anniversary coming up. I mean, the beginnings of spreading power from the single feudal lord and dictator that had already begun. But of course, and actually in some ways Henry's weakness was part of that, because then the people around him could become more and more powerful. But it's a slow process, as you know. I mean, it's you know, the whole idea of the rank of an earl was a king's companion. That was the whole purpose of them. It was the king and his gang. You know, the whole feudal setup is to keep everyone down beneath you. You know, it's the way it was meant to work. But this was sort of the beginning of a parliamentary democracy, effectively. But because Parliament exists and members were elected, and it's just they didn't have a great deal of power. They were effectively running the king's households for him. You know.
So for this book, and I know you've done so much research on your other series too, but any particular research that you did on this, except going to all the places where actually things take place, but other research or anything that really surprised you when you were looking into getting the background? And is it hard to stop doing the research part and sit down and do the writing, or is it, you know, for some writers it's hard to just not keep gathering and gathering, because that's part of the process.
I do tend to gather, and then I also find out that I'm about to write a scene of a particular castle and I haven't been to it, and then I call up my friend Clive, because he used to be a tour guide around London and some of England, and he knows things that no other people have only can dream of knowing. So I tend to go with him to the various places, and whether it's I went to Warwick Castle recently. That was wonderful, and it was. I don't know if do you get horrible history here? Do you
what?
You know those?
Oh yes, yes.
There's a whole bunch of people who do it as a sort of they will go descend upon a place and in costume, and they were all there, and I was a little irritated because I was bringing my kids, and I thought, okay, seriously, they'll enjoy themselves, and I will look at the thing and I will read all the notices, and then everyone was wandering around playing a Victorian, maths teacher, and this sort of thing. But my kids were over the moon. I have to say, they absolutely loved it, because they did all the way through history. It wasn't all my period.
Yeah, right.
But it was good fun to see, and it was an incredibly beautiful castle, and they had a trebuchet, throwing a great bundle of burning rock into the air, which was good fun.
In the book, I was blown away by the description, not only of what people wear, but what people eat. Like when Margaret comes over, she's in England now, and she's homesick. She's very homesick, but she smells because the pig slaughter is going on, and she talks about. And this was just sort of blew me away, because I never knew this would have been a treat. But taking pig's blood and mixing it with sugar, and that was a treat for children.
Yes. Well, the thing is, but
I loved all this description of food and what people ate and all that kind of stuff. Just makes it such richer, reading.
I have an Italian father-in-law, and he remembers that as a treat from his childhood. So right up to, I don't think anyone has blood and sugar mixed into a foam anymore, and give that to the kids, and they get all smeary with it, like it's some sort of butcher shop disaster. But that was only, he's about 75, so when he was a kid, sort of 60, 70 years ago, kids in Italy were still doing that. So,
that was great. The way she talked about it, and she had such great memories. Yes. But that was so interesting. And the other thing was that wonderful comparison about, I always say the English food is so.
Boiled.
Yes. And then the French food, even back then, comparing the differences in cuisine, but also to how she misses that, but how her sister says, she looks well because she's eating more meat or things like that. Yes. I thought that was so interesting. So Derry Brewer, did you base him on anybody?
Well, my son's football coach.
The coach. Okay, so that was it. To a degree. Okay.
No one is no one is a straight copy of someone I've met, but you find elements of people. And he was one of them because he used to make me laugh with his ridiculous physical
Yeah.
threats. But, you know, and as I say, there's a touch of the Spy Master and Walsingham, John Dee and people like
Right,
that.
sure.
But,
Yeah, great. But then, okay, when you think about, the 100 Years' War, and here now we're heading into 30 more years, this continual battle with France. Was that, I mean, the fodder for this, I mean, I can't imagine living under these kind of years and generation after generation living with this fear.
Absolute disasters
And,
when it all went wrong. I mean, you're talking about almost the death of a generation. I mean, the whole business of the English losing in France and then all of those thousands of farmers being turfed out and sent onto the road as refugees and then coming home and rioting and heading to London and marching on London and breaking open the Tower of London. And I went to the Tower of London. They made no mention of that in their history, which is kind of interesting. Because at one point in the next book, well, there was an attack on the... I know this is a book to come, but...
Well, that's okay. You can say a little bit. Not too many spoilers, though.
No,
even though we know, Right.
But there were you come across these moments, and there was a bit with a mob in London where they attacked the Tower of London and they fired cannon directly into them. So, you know, killing people on the streets of London. And they were so incensed and enraged by this that they ran to the only bridge that crossed the Thames at that point, only one. They went across to an armoury on the other side and they brought out a cannon and blew in one of the walls of the Tower of London. And then all trotted back again to come and, give them a good slaughtering for that nasty business of firing into the crowd. I mean, these were pretty violent days. And very often the only redress, when you had been treated cruelly by the sheriffs and the bailiffs and so on, all you could do was march. And part of me kind of admires that. It's always from Kent as well, and my family would originally have come from Kent, so I'm always very sympathetic to the Kentish people, the men of Kent. It's good.
Well, and this peace that Henry has made by marrying Margaret, and then all those lands, then where there were a lot of English that had settled and were farming and sheep farming and all this kind of stuff. But then when the French army starts marching through,
And
some of those
rolls them right
scenes where it's just, I mean, so much brutality and everything that happens to these is incredible.
I mean, like you said, it was a very violent time.
Yeah, right.
And not only that, but you've had your land and your family home, which you could have had for generations, just given away under you because nobody owned land except for the king and the church. Everyone else was just renting.
Sure.
So, how absolutely infuriating and helpless you must have felt, to have it all just given away by the grand plans, which of course fell apart. It didn't work.
Yeah.
And it was an absolute disaster and led to the complete loss of northern France.
Right.
I don't know if they've used it well since then, honestly. I mean,
So, all the things that are happening, and when you think of all the other writers that are writing about English history, whether it's Alison Weir, and now she's even written some historical fiction in addition to her Philippa Gregory, and she's been here several times. And when you think about, all the different television shows that are really have been on recently, and thinking, this would be so perfect. And I know saying that options are bought, and I know, but whatever happens.
It was Philippa Gregory. Go on.
No. But, the White Queen, and, has been made. And also, too, when you think of the Game of Thrones and all these other books that have the same sort of, treachery and butchery and all these things that happen in this.
I think the heart of it, people are interested in people. They always have been. And, that's simply it. That's why I keep reading, or for that matter, watching episodes of 24. Kiefer Sutherland, which I can't get enough of at the moment.
Well, I think House of Cards is a good one.
Yes. There was Breaking Bad. But,
all those.
I'm a particular fan of that one because Bryan Cranston expressed an interest in making some sort of television series about the Dangerous Book for boys. Nothing like Breaking Bad.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, he would do a great job because I knew him in Malcolm in the... I didn't know him, but I knew of him in Malcolm in the Middle, and he was that father. But, these things do come and go, and it was Philippa Gregory in Dublin about 12 years ago who I'd had my first option, and she said, okay, don't get too excited, Conn, sometimes they come and they go, and I was thinking, no, I had no idea. And of course that one crashed and burned a couple of years later, but I take heart from the fact that she's had some wonderful films made, The Other Berlin Girl, this sort of thing.
Sure.
And also I quite like Philippa, so we keep fingers crossed, because it's not it just reaches that bigger audience, and I think it's what every writer wants. They want to be read, you know. Of course.
Well, sure. The book is always better, but we do like to see some of this on big screens or little screens, or
there is that as well. It's a complete.
Well, and Hilary Mantel, Wolf Hall's going to be made.
We're in the same agency. My agent is AM Heath.
And we're waiting for her third book. So that's just like we'll wait for this. So when you sit down, do you create an outline or a timeline? So because you keep so well to the historic fact that keeps the history going, but do you have to have that in front of you to make sure that you're keeping along with the timeline?
I'm a note taker. I fill books with medium-term planning and long-term planning and what I've got to do with it, because otherwise I forget. You know, I mean, I live in fear of. In fact, it did happen to me, but I'm not going to tell you where, because I forgot a minor character, and then it was later on I thought, oh, he wasn't that minor, you know. Unfortunately, I really needed to put him back in, and now I'm in the position where I can't, because it was in a previous published book, and I thought he should have been in that battle, and he wasn't. And because he wasn't there, I'm now in this difficult position. I had to work very hard. I had to really throw, juggle plates, and I live in terror of that happening again. You know, something awful like that. So yes, I have to make sure all the right people are in the right places, and that I haven't forgotten, you know, some major son who turns out to be quite important later on.
So The Dangerous Book for Boys. I mean, I can't. Millions and millions have been sold worldwide, and we sold our fair share here too. What a fun book! But you and your brother put this book together, or worked on it, or how did the collaboration work?
Well, you know, can I say collaboration? I mean, I always get called the co-author. It's very annoying for me. You know, he was present in the room. You know, no, I'm joking. It was a collaborative thing. I mean, someone had to make the coffee. No, that's not fair. But he's not here, so what the heck?
That's okay. I mean, he can't.
I do remember when we did a chapter on knots every boy should know. We obviously included in the original version the hangman's noose, which is, you know, famous and iconic and sort of eerie to look upon. You know, and it's very, very easy recognised. And I obviously made it and then put it over my neck, because that's the first thing you do, and there were two ropes coming off it, and I tried to take it off, so I pulled one and it tightened, and then I couldn't see it, and it was under my chin. So I said to my brother, okay, I can't see the knot now, so you need to come over and help me with this. And he said, right, no problem. And he pulled the wrong one again, so it really tightened, and I was going a little bit blue, and we were having a little moment in the shed. You know, that was quite useful. He did save my life when that went wrong. And, so there were moments like that. And actually, although I do take the mickey out of him quite a lot, and he completely deserves it, but when we finished the book, I was with it had been offered to a different publisher, Bloomsbury, and they said, we like the book, but we don't like about 8 chapters. We think 8 chapters are potentially controversial. And so we would like you to cut these 8 chapters.
Oh, well, that's the fun part.
Well, exactly. It was almost completely the fun part. It would have ripped, you know, the heart out of the book.
The dangerous part would have been taken out of the title.
Much, yes. So they said, you know, you can. If you cut those chapters out, then we'll sell. I'll use their word. We'll sell shed loads. But if you keep them in, we'll price it at £25 and effectively kill it stone dead. You know, do it limited runs and all the rest. And I was genuinely caught, because you know, every writer wants a book to be read, wants it to be sold, of course, but at the same time, I knew that was wrong. But I spoke to my brother, and he completely justified his presence, you know, because he said, you know what, Con, I don't care if we don't sell any copies, if we only get the copies for our own kids that we'll stick on our own shelves, I would like it to be the book that we put together over the 6 months. So I said, okay, but I can't very well go back to them and say, you know, that nuclear option that you thought I'd never take, I'm taking that one, please. So we ended up sending it, you know, on a motorcycle across London to a different editor at HarperCollins, and she took it on, and you know, and the rest is history, because it worked out very well, but it was very nearly completely ruined, and it was the one time my brother really stepped up and got it absolutely right.
No, it's such a fun book. Oh my gosh, we love just hand-selling that book.
We never
so
thought
much.
it was. We genuinely didn't think it would sell.
Oh my gosh!
We thought it was all the stuff we did when we were kids, and coming up with weird little.
Hey, my brothers, we used to do stuff like that all the time.
That's what's
making childhood too safe.
Well, this is yes, absolutely. Well, there was a strong part of that about it, but finding out that so many people cared about exactly the same things, and were interested in the same things,
and adults too. Do all the things in the book too.
Absolutely.
Well, Conn, thank you so much, and congratulations on the War of the Roses. And we will be very impatient for book number 2, but we will wait.
Yes,
but
because the story is there. So all I have to do is frame it. I'm very. It's in a lovely position to be in.
Yeah.
You know,
This book is
perspective.
what incredible people you've written about this.
Yes,
It
they
was
are.
wonderful. So
They are
yeah.
interesting people. All I have to do is do them justice.
That's right,
all.
and you have.
Yes,
Thank you
good.
so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
Pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Wow, what a fantastic discussion I just had with Conn Iggulden about his new book, historical fiction, The War of the Roses, Stormbird. Thanks for joining me on Authors Revealed.